Welcome to a new episode of the Straight Wrestling Voices of the Indies podcast. I'm your host, Morbo, and with me, as always, everyone's favorite US independent wrestling fan, Sebastian.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Morbo, as always. And welcome, everyone, to the third episode of Straight Wrestling Voices of the Indies. And our guest today is, in my opinion, not only one of the best technical wrestlers in North American independent wrestling, but one of the best technical wrestlers in all of wrestling. He won the Scenic City Invitational in 2019. He won WXW Ambition in 2020. He competed at the 2020 WXW 16 Karat Gold. Welcome, Daniel Makabe, and thank you very much for taking the time to be our guest today.
Thank you very much for having me. That's a very pleasant introduction, bringing up some of the literal highlights of my career, and yeah, that's very very kind words of you. And I'm happy to join you here on bright and early on a Saturday morning, my time. There's a bit of a time difference, obviously, between us, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for inviting me.
So, Daniel, for the few people who don't know who you are, maybe introduce yourself. Who is Daniel Makabe?
I'd say there's more than a few people who don't know who I am. I'm an independent wrestler based out of Greater Vancouver, British Columbia, on the west coast of Canada. I had my first independent match in the fall of 2003, so coming on 20 years, although there was quite a stretch of time where I was not particularly active. And really, I would say I have only really been active on the independents for the last 6 or 7 years, predominantly in the Pacific Northwest region of North America, so Greater Vancouver, Greater Seattle, Greater Portland, but also starting in 2018, started to branch out a little bit more around America and Canada. And then as of late 2019, early 2020, wrestled in Europe a handful of times. Coming over twice for WXW in Germany, as well as a couple different promotions in England. And yeah, I am very much an independent wrestler through and through. I'm staunchly independent, both in that's where I wrestle on independence, but also in the way that I conduct myself and the way that I market myself and do merchandise and all of those things. And yeah, technical wrestling is the name of the game. If you've heard of me, it is very possible because you saw my series of matches with Timothy Thatcher that happened between 2017 and 2019, 3 of which for the 321 Battle promotion in Seattle, which is unfortunately no longer with us. And one of them for WXW in Toronto during SummerSlam weekend that year. So, yeah, the last couple of years, things have slowed down a little bit due to a little thing called the pandemic and battling some injuries, but still, semi-active in my region here in the Northwest, as well as, quite active in the Southeast. It's another part of North America that's really taken to me. A lot of the indies that Sebastian himself went to see and visit this past summer in Chattanooga, Tennessee, as well as Action Wrestling based in Tyrone, Georgia, and some other promotions around the United States. So,
can you tell us a little bit about how you got into wrestling as a fan and also what fascinates you about wrestling?
Oh, wow. So I'm really going to date myself here, guys. What got me into wrestling was it was on television as a child, for sure. And I would catch it occasionally, but it wasn't something that really captivated me until it was watching WrestleMania with my father one year. And to show you how old I am, this was before pay-per-view was available in Canada. So we had a thing called closed circuit, which was, closed circuit dated back to the 60s and 70s. So, they show big boxing matches and certain wrestling matches. and so I went to my local arena where the local hockey team plays, and they showed WrestleMania 7 on closed circuit. So you would watch it in the stands like you were at a sporting event. And from that point on, I was just obsessed watching wrestling every weekend, getting the magazines, and it really took over my childhood, to say the least. And then, as far as what captivates me about pro wrestling, that's interesting because, even though I've been doing this for so long, I've been a fan for over 30 years at this point, and I still very much am a fan, even though I'm someone who's an active participant as well. Um, you know what? I mean, as someone who really prides themselves on their technical abilities, I'm still captivated by technique and movement, and there's so much that has been done, and a lot of pro wrestling is patterns and repetition and familiarity, and there's a certain kind of charm to that I appreciate, but it's also really nice and refreshing to see people coming up, uh, doing things that you've never seen before, or are a unique twist on things. And so I truly love just watching people wrestle and entertaining me and doing things that I've never thought of, or wouldn't have necessarily conceived as being possible. And I think it's just amazing that we have an art form that, it is art, it is creative, but it's also incredibly physical, and it's sports, and it just kind of takes all these things that I love, because I am, a fan of the arts, and I am a fan of sports in other forms, and kind of merges it all together in this truly unique presentation.
In preparation for this interview, I watched the life of Daniel Makabe on IWTV, and the first scene that stood out for me was you browsing through your vinyl collection, because I'm also a music fan and a vinyl collector. So for me, it was way too short. Could have listened to you for hours talking about your favorite records.
Did you? Sorry to cut you off, but for anyone who's not familiar, is kind of a documentary series on IWTV. Thank you for watching that. That is a nice, you did your research, because it's over an hour long, but there is a separate feature that's available on IWTV of me just browsing my vinyl collection, an unedited version of that segment. If I'm not sure if you caught that, but
yeah, I saw it, but I remember it was like 11, 12 minutes. I could still listen. You could go to every record, in my opinion, but that's just my opinion.
I appreciate that. I've considered doing that just as like for my Instagram, maybe going through my vinyl collection, letter by letter, or just in small segments. That's something that's crossed my mind. My ever growing vinyl collection. I mean, you know for firsthand very well that it's almost a disease that kind of takes over.
Definitely. But the question I want to ask is, since you are also a musician, do you see similarities between being a wrestler and being a musician?
Oh, there's tons of similarities. Yeah. And I always it's interesting to see the similarities, but also where things kind of differ, where certain things it's like, okay, this should be the same, but it isn't, Um, I've gone on tour with bands and seen how bands, especially at a certain level, bands get treated better than independent wrestlers do quite often when it comes to the accommodations and conveniences and money for sure. But if we're talking in more of an artistic and a creative way, yeah, I'm trying to think. Because yeah, I do play music. I play in multiple bands. I'm a guitar player, sometimes backup singer, I guess. And um, I'm trying to think. I don't know if my approach is necessarily the same. They both I'll say creative outlets in my life that feed separate creative needs within me. So that for sure is the same. The actual process, the process of writing a song versus the process of writing a match. Writing a match right there is incorrect terminology. Putting a match together um, uh, is is slightly different. Although I've just kind of spurned this thought in my brain. I had this conversation with the musician earlier this year, in that pro wrestling, the only kind of real art form that it can be compared to um, is like improvisational jazz. In that you can take two pro wrestlers who may have never met one another before, may not even speak the same language, and you can put them in the ring and say, put together a match and have it go 10 to 15 minutes. And they should be able to do that. And you couldn't necessarily take two rock musicians and put them on the stage and say, okay, play me a song for 15 minutes. That might be a bit of a stretch. However, jazz musicians, they have more chops. They have more experience in that kind of situations or those kind of circumstances, and are used to improvising and just being a little bit more creative and flowing. And I feel like that's the true analog when it comes to professional wrestling and music.
Yeah, I once read Billy Corgan said that wrestlers are like jam musicians, and I thought this was a good comparison.
Yeah, jam bands too, for sure. Very, very similar. A lot of similar roots. So yeah, absolutely. I agree with Billy Corgan.
Yeah, the Smashing Pumpkins was a huge band for me back in my teenage days. But now,
yeah, I agree. The first couple records are there for sure. I got a copy of Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness for my 11th birthday on CD that I definitely still have somewhere, but I haven't necessarily listened to a lot of their newer material.
yeah, don't do it. Okay, the second part that stood out for me was you digging through your wrestling tape collection. And I want to ask you, do you have a feeling for wrestling tape nostalgia?
I do and I don't. You know what? I don't miss part of the parts of the medium that are just how expensive everything was, the cost of shipping, um, and just the amount of space that wrestling tapes or just physical media take up. As someone who has a large vinyl collection that takes up a lot of space, and all sorts of other things. I still have a ton of CDs and DVDs and physical media in general. And unfortunately, the wrestling tapes have been allocated to my storage locker, as you saw in the special, because there's just no space for them anymore. But there's certain parts I miss. Like I think there's a certain charm, and this is just in general, to um, having to wait for something and really appreciating it once you have it. And there's still examples now where a wrestling show happens and it's not something that's streamed live, and you have to wait until either physical media or digital media appears of it. Of course, the most famous example of that is Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, who don't seem to be in any rush whatsoever to release their shows. But um, nowadays, I very much appreciate convenience. I very much appreciate that I can watch a wrestling show that's happening on the other side of the world as it's happening, and can talk about it with fellow, fans and friends and whoever at the same time. Like, even what we're doing today really wouldn't be feasible or possible when I first started tape trading and literally sending letters and yeah, we had instant messenger, and those kind of things where we can talk to people all around the world. But not technology, for better or worse, really has impacted independent wrestling. I think it's made my life a whole heck of a lot more interesting because I've got fans and friends that I've made literally all over the world, and certainly a lot of them in Western Europe that probably wouldn't know who I was otherwise if we were still in the good old days of tape trading.
Do you have still some memorable tapes specifically? Because, for example, I still remember the day I got the first Ring of Honor show in the mail, which was like the holy grail back then. So I still remember this day.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. There was, I mean, the one I remember really, I've used this example before, but there was a New Japan Junior title match between Minoru Tanaka and a guy named Takahiro Murahama, who was Osaka Pro Wrestling. He was like a former kickboxer, shoot fighter who had turned to pro wrestling, and it was a match that I remember, seeing it announced and hearing after it had happened that it was a great match, and then tracking down the tape and then finally getting in and watching it and the match living up to the hype. And that whole process, that was like a 6 to 8 week process of from hearing of the match announced to hearing the match happen to finally getting a copy of the match on tape and really enjoying it.
But the tape you took out of your collection in documentary was Battle Arts. So tell us about your love for Battle Arts, because I love Battle Arts as well.
Awesome. Yeah, you know what? Battle Arts, really, the love for Battle Arts came from being someone who read Death Valley Driver. So for those who are not familiar, Death Valley Driver was a message board. It still is a message board, but it's a message board that came via a series of reviews written by a bunch of guys based on the East Coast of the United States. Most famously is probably Dean Rasmussen, who started it all, who unfortunately passed away earlier this year. But also Phil Schneider, who went on to write Segunda Caída, which is still an active blog that is reviewing all sorts of interesting wrestling from all over the world. And Death Valley Driver, they would write these like digest reviews of new footage, uncovered footage, lots of Japanese, lots of Mexican wrestling, European wrestling, American independent wrestling. And it's really just reading about these matches before we had the technology where you could just instantly watch something online. Reading about these matches and hearing like, oh, wow, this sounds amazing. I really need to seek out a tape of this. And then finding community within their message board that they had attached to the website. That really kind of opened things up for me when it came to tape trading, when it came to sharing things with my fellow community, meeting people locally who ended up becoming some of my best friends. And actually the people who I ended up going to wrestling school with are friends of mine that I met via Death Valley Driver, which is crazy in hindsight. But they were massive proponents of this little promotion called Battle Arts that I had never heard of before reading that website. And, they just were constantly putting over just the amount of struggle and the reality and just how brutally stiff these guys were working. And, I'm someone who came up, I was an early fan of UFC and watching mixed martial arts when I was a teenager, when it was still kind of taboo and not so widespread over here. I remember convincing my parents to let me buy an early UFC pay-per-view, and I think they just thought it was pro wrestling until they watched it along with me and realized just how graphic and brutal it was. But so the fact that Battle Arts was this was like a hybrid, work pro wrestling version of mixed martial arts, but with more more of a colorful flair to it, because there's a lot of aspects of pro wrestling that obviously would not happen in a shoot fight that are incorporated into the Battle Arts style. So it's this beautiful hybrid of just this violent, realistic, gritty struggle that also has some of the more colorful and familiar elements of pro wrestling that someone who might not be familiar with shoot style wrestling might find as a nice barrier of entry. I always thought it was it was the most accessible of the shoot style promotions that I was starting to watch in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I love it. It's I'm super grateful and blessed to have gotten to meet and wrestle some of the biggest stars of that promotion. Notably Yuki Ishikawa, who is the founder of Battle Arts, and his perennial rival Daisuke Ikeda. And it's had such a major influence on me, both as a fan of pro wrestling and also as someone who actively tries to keep parts of that style alive in how I do my own work in the ring. So
you already now talked about what got you into wrestling and what fascinates you about wrestling. But I would like to take a look at the more recent things that happens in your wrestling career, but you could also say in your life. Let's say the last 14 and a half months, because on June 24th, 2022, so last year, you had a match against Travis Williams at the Nation Extreme Wrestling Show NEW for Life. For those of you who don't know, Nation Extreme Wrestling promotion from the Vancouver area, also from your home region. Can you explain what happened at that match and how it impacted maybe not only your career, but maybe also your life in general?
yeah, for sure. You hit me with the big guns here. It's fine. You warned me you were going to ask about this. So NEW is a local promotion here in Vancouver that run. That particular show was at a venue called the Commodore Ballroom, which is a beautiful concert venue that I've seen lots of great shows at. It's a 1,000 cap room, and conveniently enough, at the time of recording this, there's actually a show for them later today. But more importantly, last June was a match to be in Travis, and Travis is someone I've known for years, who's just such a gifted and talented young wrestler. He's still in his early 20s and has been doing this for 5 or 6 years, and he's someone that I've really I've been grateful to see him on the come up and had opportunities to wrestle him. But going into that match, I'd had some on and off injury issues for the past year or two. I had pinched a nerve in my neck the previous fall that had affected some of my matches, although some of my best matches I had in the fall of 2021 was with a pinched nerve in my neck, where I was greatly having to reduce some of the moves and the way that I put my matches together. The first time I wrestled Alex Shelley, a match that I really loved against Cole Radrick, a match that I really loved against a guy named Kyle Matthews. All three of those matches happened with me having a pinched nerve in my neck and having to modify my style. So, I'd had some injury issues kind of leading up to that match, and that had been, making me a little concerned. And unfortunately, in the middle of that match, I took a back suplex off the top rope and sustained a pretty bad back injury. I had previously hurt my back in the summer of 2009, so 13 years prior, and I had way back in 2009, I had a compression fracture in my vertebrae and 2 bulging discs in my vertebrae, which are injuries that are I mean, the compression fracture is easy enough to heal. Bulging discs never truly go away. You just kind of have to rehab the area and strengthen the muscles in that region. And it's something that I've done over the years, and obviously had a really healthy and satisfying output as far as when I got hurt in 2009, I really didn't expect to do everything that I've done subsequently in pro wrestling. So in 2022, it was very familiar a very familiar situation. It felt almost exactly the same as it did that day, almost 13 years prior. And just kind of re-aggravated the disc injuries in my lower back. Um, Definitely have experienced some numbness off and on throughout my legs and my body, especially immediately after impact on that back suplex. Um, spent the night in the hospital. Definitely was not a pleasant experience. Was one of the worst nights of my life. Truly, just really uncomfortable and unpleasant. And I could go on about the healthcare system here in Canada and how it's kind of steadily declining. But yeah, so subsequently, other than a couple of matches that I had already agreed to that I took part in, for the most part, I basically took the next 6 or 7 months off of wrestling. Most of the back half of 2022, no wrestling, and even all the way up until February of this past year, spending a lot of time doing physical therapy and strength training at the gym, and doing the best I can to strengthen the muscles in and around the area, so as to be able to still do this for the time being, even with um, a compromised back, which is still gives me problems from here and there, and it's still something I have to be really mindful about, how often I'm wrestling, and exactly what I'm doing within the context of my matches, which has affected me this year for sure. I've had more matches this year than I thought I was going to, but still maybe not as many as I potentially could have. How many opportunities that could have possibly been afforded to me if I wasn't still kind of dealing with this back injury.
One of the few matches you still had in 2022 in the last year was at day 2 of the Scenic City Invitational against Dominic Guarini on August 6th. And after that, you decided to make your injury public and also talk about your decision to take a break or work a lighter schedule. I think at that moment you really didn't know what the future would bring. Can you maybe tell us what went through your head before you made that announcement, during making that announcement, maybe also after making the announcement?
Yeah, that was a really emotional moment. Um, I really didn't know what my future held. Subsequently, I've had lots of people come up to me, if they see me on shows, say, "Didn't you retire? Didn't I see you make a speech saying you're retired?" And I definitely did not say that at any point in that speech. And I really made a conscious decision to not say the word retire, because that's one of my biggest pet peeves, is especially independent wrestling, where for the most part this is not anyone's job. This is very much a hobby. So you don't really retire from a hobby. I've had people call me out. They don't like the word hobby. Hobby seems too informal, and maybe doesn't imply as much passion and dedication myself and my fellow wrestlers give to this. So maybe hobby is not the correct word, but it's not my profession. I will say it's not. Do I get paid to wrestle? Yes. Does it the primary source of my income? No, it's not. But so, anyways, you don't retire necessarily from something like this. You just kind of stop doing it when you're unable to. And so I specifically didn't want to use the words retirement, but I really didn't know what the future held. I knew that at a minimum, I wanted to have at least 1 or 2 more matches, in Vancouver and Seattle, the parts of the world that, where I live in Vancouver, and Seattle is my home away from home. And, as I made reference in that moment, you asked me what were my thoughts before, during and after. it's funny. It kind of truly did have an effect on my personal life, because I referenced my then girlfriend who lives in Seattle, and how Seattle is my second home because I spend so much time there because of our relationship. And I referenced the fact that I was hoping to one day marry her, and that kind of funny enough, like, it kind of set the wheels in motion for us discussing that more seriously, and subsequently 2 months later, we got engaged, and we are getting married uh, next spring, 2024. So that was a nice byproduct of that speech. I thought I was going to be a lot more emotional making that speech than I ended up being. Anyone who wants to see it is on IWTV, or also someone tweeted it at the time, so you could probably track it down on Twitter as well. But I I didn't know whether or not I'd be able to return to the Southeast or not, and I didn't want to potentially leave that door open, where I never came back, and I was never able to say thank you and just express how important that region was to me, because the Northwest made me, for sure. People first heard about me because of my work, and how often I was working in Seattle, for 3-2 battle. But the Southeast is the first region to book me outside of the Northwest. The first independent promotion to do so was SUP, Southern Underground Pro Wrestling, in Nashville, and for that I'm forever grateful. And those guys are some of my best friends. Kevin Koo, Dom Guarini, Dylan Hales, who run SUP. But it was that first time that I wrestled at SUP in 2018 that Dylan said, "We want to bring you back for Scenic City Invitational next summer, and we're going to make it happen however we have to." And winning SCI 2019 is one of the highlights of my independent career. They're the first people to put me on a plane outside of my region, and obviously to have me win such a prestigious tournament led to so many other opportunities and so much more visibility for me and my style of wrestling. And I'm forever grateful and appreciative that that region has really taken to me as one of their own, even though you wouldn't necessarily think, like, technical wrestler from Western Canada, he's going to be super popular in Tennessee. That wouldn't necessarily be your thought. But yeah, so that speech kind of compacted a lot of emotions and thoughts, and kind of laid it all out on the line in a 2-minute platform in front of everyone there in the gym that day, and everyone watching at IWTV.
As you already said, you had one more match in August in 2022, and then had a break for several months. But in this year, you are back in the ring. And I would like to know, how did your perspective, not only on wrestling, but maybe also on life in general? You already mentioned the changes in your private life, and of course, congratulations on you getting engaged. How would you say did this change your perspective on wrestling, or your perspective on life in general, compared to the time before the injury?
I think I've been at least I've been trying to be more mindful of really appreciating the opportunities that I've had, and whatever opportunities I still have. Um, Independent wrestling is very much like a what have you done for me currently? What have you done for me recently? It's about, oh, I saw someone new do this cool new move on social media, and now they're going to get uh, a plethora of bookings, and I'm going to be able to see them at my local indie because that one cool thing they did really caught everyone's attention. And there's numerous examples that you can point to of this happening, especially in the independents over the years. So I recognize now that, and part of it was because I stopped taking bookings for so long because I was rehabbing. Independent promoters didn't necessarily know that I was available, that I was around, still able to take bookings or willing to take bookings. But it definitely kind of opened up my eyes about, there was kind of a loneliness there, feeling like, I wasn't in vogue anymore. I wasn't anyone's first choice. No one was asking me to be a part of their shows. And even when I did reach out to promotions about, potentially coming back and wrestling for them again, I wasn't anyone's first choice anymore, because, you know, life moves on and independent wrestling moves on and new wrestlers are popping up literally every day. Someone's getting trained and someone is younger and more talented and more athletic and it's something new and exciting, So um, it's really made me appreciate the opportunities that I had. And, there are still promoters and promotions out there who have, reached out to me and wanted me to be a part of their shows. And obviously, there's groups that I've worked for this year that I've worked for plenty of times in the past, in regions that I've worked plenty of times. SOS was my first match back in the greater Seattle area, but also working for NEW here in Vancouver, working for DOA in Portland, being able to return to the South to work for Action in TWE. But also, for the first time ever, I've worked in Alberta this year for a couple of promotions that I never worked for. So there have still been new opportunities and exciting opportunities that have come up this year, even if my schedule has not been necessarily as busy as I hoped it would be at points this year. I can truly not complain because I've had some really great opportunities that I've been able to capitalize on and have made this year, maybe as memorable as any year as I've had in independent wrestling. Maybe not 2019. That was a pretty memorable year, but it's still been a very good year, and I've got to wrestle, some great opponents, and that's something that I was very conscious of, actually. Now that I truly think about the question, that when I was coming back earlier this year, I wanted to be very cognizant of. I really only wanted to wrestle for promoters that I liked or had a certain familiarity with, or who I respected. Maybe it's a promotion I never worked for, but it's someone that I've appreciated their work from afar. And I only wanted to wrestle people who I considered friends, or if it's someone that wasn't necessarily a close personal friend, someone who I could have a great match with, someone whose style I appreciate and whose work I like and love in certain instances, and I wanted to have the opportunity to work with those kind of people. Because at this point, I'm doing this for my own personal satisfaction and fulfillment at this point. So I didn't want to be taking bookings just for the sake of taking bookings. I wanted them to have a deeper level of fulfillment to them going forward, and all of that is a byproduct of this last year and a half, and gaining a little bit more clarity on who I am and kind of my place in independent wrestling.
My last question before Morbo will talk to you about what is next for you is, since returning to the ring, you talked about what happened and what you want to do, and also how it was a bit difficult to get booked again and so on. But since returning to the ring, what were your favorite experiences and matches, and maybe also like moments for you?
So basically the last 6 months. Let me think. Getting to be a surprise on a handful of shows in the South this past spring, that was pretty great. Being the surprise main event of Action's 5th anniversary show versus Adam Priest for the Action title was a great moment. Especially just hearing the reception from people who weren't aware that I was there that night. And then, the following evening, kind of doing the same thing at TWE against Darian Bankston. Getting to wrestle Skida is probably the craziest thing. For those unfamiliar, Skida is a legendary luchador and lucha trainer who has really helped popularize the llave style of Mexican wrestling. Probably most famously in for a lot of the early Toryumon and Dragon Gate wrestlers, but also for anyone who is a big fan of American independence for the early Chikara style of wrestling. Skida was a primary influence on that. So I got to wrestle Skida in a tag match in Calgary, Alberta earlier this year, and that was just getting to be around him and talk to him and spend time in the locker room with him, but also then getting to go out there and mix it up with him on the mat was just such a cool experience that I never would have imagined possible. So yeah, that was crazy. Um, Wrestling has afforded me some really amazing opportunities when it comes to wrestling in places where you wouldn't necessarily expect wrestling to be. This past May, I was able to go on tour with a couple bands who wanted to incorporate wrestling into their tour and their live presentation, and I was able to wrestle some really great opponents and see some amazing musicians that I'm huge fans of every night, and just sort of see how wrestling can really captivate non-wrestling fans. We were the opening act on a concert bill in front of people who for the most part were not wrestling fans, and just seeing how every night, little by little, we'd win more and more fans over with what we were doing, and so that was an amazing opportunity. It also sort of showed me how the other half live, because I got fed really well and paid really well and really nice accommodations being on a concert tour as opposed to being an independent wrestler. Um, and then another one that I have been trying to push for years and years and years was this past July. We had the first ever Cascadia Wrestling Cup for Prestige Wrestling in Portland, Oregon. 2 nights, a 2-night 16-person tournament. You can catch it. It's on YouTube. Um, and I have been saying for years how the Pacific Northwest, our part of North America, has so much talent between British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon, that we really deserved our own regional showcase tournament to show the world how great the talent here is. As someone who had been in multiple Scenic City Invitationals, I'd been in three SCIs, and knew what impact that tournament had on the Southeast region. I knew that we really deserved and should have something similar to that here in the Northwest. And I was really happy with both of my matches in that tournament versus Artemis Spencer in round one and versus Cody Chun in round two. And previously got to wrestle Cody Chun earlier this year in Vancouver as well. He's another great independent wrestler from here in the Northwest. But just the fact that that tournament existed, and just the atmosphere of the fans, but also all the other wrestlers backstage, just how excited everyone was to be a part of the inaugural one, and really, really wanted to do our best to put our region on the map. Um, that's something I'm incredibly proud of, and I was so grateful to be a part of, and hope that continues to be um, a highlight on the independent wrestling calendar every year. I hope it's something that Prestige does annually, and more people travel for it, similar to how people travel for SCI, such as yourself, Sebastian. There were fans who came up to me at the Prestige Cascadia Cup who had traveled from Montreal on the east coast of Canada for that tournament. So that was really exciting for me, and I hope it's something that grows from here, and I'm very proud to have been a part of the inaugural one.
Okay, on September the 2nd, you had a match against Nicole Matthews at Dusk Pro. Can you tell us why this was such a special match for you?
Oh yeah, I kind of buried the lead. I just didn't want to keep talking about things that I've done this year, but that is definitely included in special moments this past year. Nicole Matthews is someone that I've known for ever, almost half of our lives, but we weren't really close friends. We kind of trained in different circles and worked for different promotions. but we kind of had similar upticks in our careers in that we both traveled outside of the region a lot. Her more so than me. She wrestled all over the United States. She wrestled in Japan, which I've never gotten to do. She's been to Europe. She's going back to Europe very shortly. She'll be in Germany, so that's very exciting for her. But she's someone who, especially during the pandemic, I became closer and closer to. Got to wrestle finally for the first time in 2021. Got to train a lot with over the last couple of years, and I just kind of got to know each other and realize, how similar we think about wrestling, how similar our influences are, and and all of that. So we had previously had two matches, one in 2021, one in 2022. And this match this past week at Dusk Pro Wrestling was our third match in our trilogy, our rubber match, to decide who was the better technical wrestler between the two of us. And it was the main event of that show. It was the first time that a match of ours has been the main event of a show, which is another cool thing, just getting to really showcase what we do. And that was, the video, as of record time, the video hasn't come out, although I believe it should be out very shortly. And it's a match that both of us were really proud of. Both of us thought it was our best match against one another. It was certainly our longest match against one another. It went 25 minutes, a lot of really exciting action, lots of cool and interesting mat wrestling, but also very physical, because that's the way both of us like to work, and she's someone I just have so much respect for, and I'm so happy that she's getting her flowers now. She was someone who had a lengthy ban from wrestling in the United States, very similar to Speedball Mike Bailey, for anyone listening who might be familiar with his situation where he was unable to enter the country. Nicole Matthews was unable to enter the United States for 4.5 years. Subsequently, that has been, removed, and she has a work visa and is able to wrestle again in the United States. And she's doing that a lot more, obviously working for Defy, the group in Seattle who she predominantly works for, but she's also worked for Deadlock Pro on the East Coast of the United States and some other promotions in and around the US. And she's coming back to Europe. So she's just become a really close friend who I appreciate as a human being and appreciate as a pro wrestler, and someone that if I could wrestle her every day, if every match I ever had was against her, I could have a very exciting and interesting and fulfilling wrestling career. And we could have a different match every night. And, we wouldn't have the same match twice, So, yeah, very important match. I hope everyone watches it and enjoys it when the video comes out. And I hope, I hope there are other opportunities to wrestle her again in the future. But if that never happens again, I'm very grateful that I had these 3 matches with her, and they tell a nice kind of story over the course of those 3 matches.
We are recording this show on September the 9th, and you will have a match actually tonight against Cat Power as part of Nation Extreme 14. What are your thoughts on the match and also on the show as general? Because I read that there are some bigger names on the card, like El Fantasmo and a special guest, Aubrey Edwards.
Yeah, that's, it's my first time wrestling for Nation Extreme Wrestling for 6 months. Last time was at the same venue, the Commodore Ballroom here in Vancouver, against Cody Chun. It's a really special venue. I've spent half my life going to concerts there and seen some really amazing bands there. But now I've also been lucky enough to have wrestled there a handful of times. And so it'll be great to be back on an NEW show. They just are a first class production and really great independent promotion who majority of their shows are up on their YouTube channel. For those who might not be familiar, you can see quite a few matches of mine that I've had with them, including from the very first NEW show way back in 2021. My first match against Nicole Matthews is on their YouTube channel. So Cat Power is another person who this is a trilogy match. This is our 3rd match together. Our previous two were both in 2018 for 3-1 battle in Seattle. Our previous two were actually refereed by Aubrey Edwards too. So it'll be really nice to see Aubrey again and be on a show with her for the first time in many, many years. She's obviously moved on to, be one of the best referees in the world, and certainly one of the most notable and visible referees in the world. So I don't know for a fact if this is even a possibility, but I truly hope that she can referee my match tonight. And I'm looking forward to having another rubber match with Cat Power, another trilogy with another independent wrestler who I really just appreciate as a human being and as a friend, and someone I really like working with. And I think we've got good chemistry, and I'm really looking forward to this match tonight, and just getting to wrestle in the Commodore Ballroom again against someone that I respect. And I know she's similar point in her career to me, that she's had some injuries and she's getting a little bit older as well. And we're actually the same age. She probably is going to kill me for saying that out loud, but we are. So, it's nice to be able to get to wrestle her one last time before, who knows if we'll ever get the opportunity again. I'm just appreciating things as they happen in the moment. So,
do you have any more matches announced that you can announce or tease at this moment?
The only other match that's announced, actually, is funny, coming back to Sebastian's question about my back injury in June of 2022, and I aforementioned wrestler Travis Williams, who I was wrestling when I had that back injury. The only other match that I have announced is in 2 weeks' time for 365 Pro Wrestling in Victoria, British Columbia. And it's against Travis Williams for the first time since that match where I hurt my back. I'll be wrestling him. So that's in 2 weeks' time. I'm very much excited to wrestle Travis again. I'm excited to come back to Victoria again. For anyone not familiar, Victoria is the capital city here in British Columbia and is one of the most beautiful cities on earth. And so I'm hoping I get some time to enjoy the scenery and the city itself before spending some time with Travis in the ring again, because he's a great wrestler. He's only gotten even better since I last wrestled him. And that was only a year ago. And now he's traveling all over the world. And I'm just really excited to see what we can do in another match together. And other than that, there are a couple other matches that have not been announced yet that you will be hearing about, sometime shortly down the road. But for the time being, that is tonight versus Cat Power, and 2 weeks from now versus Travis Williams. And those are matches I'm both really excited for.
Do you have any plans or wishes to wrestle in certain promotions or certain regions again, or maybe for the first time in the not so distant future?
You know what? The only place that I've never wrestled that I absolutely want to wrestle before I'm done is California. I've somehow never wrestled in California, even though, it's not, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that far away. It is a bit of a drive, especially when you put it into terms for, compared to some of the drives people would do in Europe. For me to drive to California would take probably 13 hours. So and that's just the top of California. If I was to drive to Los Angeles, which I have done before, that's like a 20-hour drive. So I'd love to wrestle in California at least once. There are promotions there. West Coast Pro doing amazing things in Northern California. Prestige starting to do things in Southern California. I'd love to work for either of those promotions. Obviously, I'd like to be able to come back to the Southeast at least one more time. Selfishly, I'd love to wrestle SCI one more time. It's funny that I got kind of pegged as this kind of shoot style guy and wrestled in a series of ambition tournaments for WXW before the pandemic. And I feel like my skill set when it comes to shoot style wrestling has only expanded since then. And I would be so much better in that format than I was then. So I have zero expectations of ever wrestling in an ambition tournament again, but I would love the opportunity to do that again. So, this might all just be pipe dreams, but I hope at least some of those things I think are possible and are goals that could be accomplished for sure.
Okay, Daniel, that's it. That's the end of the interview. And as always, the stage is yours. You can plug anything you want.
Thank you so much for having me on, guys. I greatly appreciate the opportunity. We managed to make this work despite a hefty 9-hour time difference. But for anyone who's not familiar or is not following me, I'm definitely available to follow on Instagram or Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. I'm at Daniel Makabe, DanielMakabe. That's the best place to find out where I'm going to be wrestling, upcoming dates. And, I share some personal stuff, trips I might go on, traveling, just general life stuff. And I also, if you follow me on Twitter, it's a good way to find out about what kind of music I'm listening to or things that my band might be doing. And I'm always talking about, whatever I'm listening to, and posting daily song recommendations and album recommendations. And actually, as soon as I get off this call with you, I have to post my daily music recommendation on Twitter. So yeah, if you're not following me, those are the best places to do so. That's the best way to find out about where I'm going to be. If there's any merchandise I have that you're interested in, I do still have some T-shirts and pins and things of that nature that you can find out about via my social media. And I genuinely appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys today, and wish you the best of luck with future episodes of your show. And I appreciate people outside of North America taking such an interest in North American indies and trying to get more people talking about it and more people viewing what we're doing over here. Because I think there's a real good crop of talent who are starting to pop up more and more on independent shows over here. And we need people from all over the world talking about them, because that's how they're going to get the opportunities to, wrestle elsewhere in North America, be it Mexico or elsewhere in the United States or Canada, or get them over to Europe, get them in England, get them in Germany. There's promotions elsewhere in continental Europe as well that could really benefit from some of the great North American talent that we have over here. So I appreciate you guys shining a light on what we're doing over here, and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today.
Thank you very much for sorry.
Okay, I start. Thank you very much for being on the show. It was kind of obvious to have you on the show because you're not only friends with Sebastian, you're also his favorite wrestler. But we are all fans of your work, so it was an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you very much also for me. Thank you very much for the praise you gave us, and we appreciate you taking the time, especially on a day where you still have a match. So thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you very much, Morbo, as always. Thank you very much, Florian, as always. And thank you to everyone listening, and I hope you will listen to us again.
Monster,